Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Ali.
And very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. We're broadcasting as we almost always do from the Newsfirst studios in Jolly Dawson Street in Colombo. My guest this evening is Dr. Pakisoti Saravanamuttu, who is of course the Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Very good evening to you, Dr. Sara.
Good evening.
Why must Gota go? Why is that so important in today's terms?
Because Gotabaya Rajapaksa has come to epitomize all that is wrong in our political system. But there are particular characteristics that he has of his own which demand that he goes. One is that there is no capacity to govern. He came in promising strong leadership, strong decisive leadership. He has flipped and flopped, and he has not even... He only spoke to the nation in the course of this terrible crisis that we've had, only 2 days or 3 days ago or whatever. So, in addition to all of that, of course, is the allegations of corruption.
Against him?
Against him as well. Yes, indeed. Against him as well. Allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity. So there is a catalogue of allegations with regard to his unsuitability to govern.
But I put it to you that, notwithstanding what you've just said, 6.9 million people voted for him, and those elections were received as being free and fair.
No, absolutely. They were considered to be free and fair. 6.9 million voted for him. He stood as a strong candidate. He stood in the aftermath of the Easter Sunday bombings, where the country felt that they needed strong, decisive leadership. And then as soon as he comes into office, he restricts the tax base.
Okay, but what does that got to do with corruption and...
No, so what I'm saying is that there is, at one level, the incapacity to govern, the failure to understand basic economics and all of that. And on the other hand, there is all these allegations.
But the tax business, you know, letting people off the tax, whatever you call it, concessions. If there was no COVID-19 thereafter, and he couldn't possibly have known that COVID was coming, so surely, isn't that an unfair comparison?
No, because letting people off the tax break, as it were, the tax concessions that he made, benefited the rich. And the burden, therefore, disproportionately fell.
Yes, but our present Prime Minister, when in his short term in 2002-03, that government, did the same thing. They wrote various things off, and it was then up to a public interest litigator to go to court.
So if it was wrong then, it's wrong now.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
It's the same thing then.
Well,
all right.
Not sure of the precise circumstances, but anyway.
Yes, okay. Basically, it was same in the sense that the public purse was affected. So a country that is desperately poor can't simply afford to reduce revenue collection. That's what I mean. And especially when people and corporates not all pay their fair share. Yeah, there are very few people and companies who are proud to pay the tax. And they should be, because surely that is a sign of success. The more tax you pay, you know. And that's easy for anyone to understand, including people doing O-levels, but these politicians don't seem to. But anyway, talk about Gota going. Why is that some sort of remedial measure?
Well, I mean, in addition to all of those things that the accusations, the allegations that are made against him personally, people strongly believe that he in government, representing the entire Rajapaksa clan, therefore is an impediment to holding them to
I'm trying to elicit another answer to this. Therefore, I say to you that in this government, the Rajapaksas have been elected fairly and squarely, whether you like it or not, and I like it or not, but that's what it is. GR, the president
Absolutely, but there is nothing that says that because you've been elected by the people, that you can't be held to account for whatever crimes and misdemeanors that you have committed.
Isn't that a failure on the part of our judiciary, in the police, the investigation. You know, we've got all sorts of things. We've got investigators at the central bank. We've got FCID, the CID.
No, exactly.
Every
That is
blessed
why.
thing going.
That is why the Gota Gama protesters are talking about regime change as a precursor to systemic change of the institutions and processes, and importantly, of the political culture in this country.
But Dr. Sara, isn't it worrying to organizations such as yours and to all the sterling work that you all do, that, you know, none of these people have ever been held accountable? Can you name one minister who's jailed? I mean, in South Korea, we have 4 presidents who served jail time.
Absolutely, and that is why we have to keep persisting. That is why the public pressure is important. That is why the public pressure with regard to Gota Go is important. That's why political parties, civil society, all must come behind that position.
Isn't it sad, apart from being worrying, that even a one-time Chief Justice, having done what he, done what he did, then after he retires, comes and says, you know, I made a terrible mistake, but you can't do jack about it now.
No, I know. I mean, this is quite disgraceful. But we have to keep persisting until we get the proper institutions, the strengthening of the institutions and processes, the checks and balances, so that this can be prevented into the future, and also that the things that have happened, people will be held to account.
So these allegations of corruption against President Gotabaya, the corruption issue, let's lay aside for a moment the accountability in terms of the allegations of war crimes and so on. And I'm not going to say credible allegations, because if it's credible, it becomes fact. In terms of these other matters, why is there no investigation? Will he be investigated after he leaves office, either prematurely or at the end of his natural term?
All I will say is this, is that we will one day get a government, and hopefully it will be very, very soon, that will investigate without fear and favor. Without fear or favor, they will investigate whether a person has been president or whether he's now an ex-president or whoever, regardless of the office that they held, regardless of the title that they hold, that they will be held accountable.
When I worked in the Sunday Leader and post La Santa's unlawful killing, I remember having a conversation with Lal, the chairman and La Santa's brother, and I said, you know, how do you feel in all this business? And he said, look, I want to show you this article, and he moved his computer screen the other way, and he said, look, in the United States, I think it was, somebody was held accountable for a murder 17 years later, and he said, you know, I've got a lot of time, but it's now 13 years after the event. We don't appear to be any closer, and that is including a term of about 4 years when Ranil Wickremesinghe was the Prime Minister, and so he was very much in control. And even that 4 years failed to hold anybody accountable. So what does it say? Does it say bad things about our judicial system, or does it say bad things about our politicians, or both?
It says it's a terrible indictment on the decrepitude of our systems of accountability. Right. And therefore, they have to be changed wholesale. And we therefore have to make sure that the right people come into office and that prosecutions are pursued without fear or favor. And I know organizations like mine have been talking about this for years and years and years. But we will have to continue talking about it until we get there. The question of democracy in a country is always, I think, a project that is in a state of becoming rather than a state of being.
There's another thing that I haven't forgotten, but I'll mention it anyway. There's a company called the Capital Maharaja Group. They still have it, but at the time, their main control room at the Parliament was bombed. One of the things that was found was a claymore. This is not the kind of weapon that you can just call the arms dealer in North Korea and say, do you mind sending me a few cluster bombs, please? No. All these years later, again 13 years later, where's the answers?
I have no idea where the answers are. All I will say to you
is this a failure on all these virtual muppets who have failed to find out?
Of course it is a failure. That is why we have Gota Gogama. That is why it is spilt out into the streets. And this is why this is seen as a historic moment.
We are living in historical times now.
Absolutely. That's why this is a historic moment to grasp the opportunity for change.
Why do you think that these are not going? By these I mean the Rajapaksas, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Why is it not going?
Because Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the rest of his family will lose whatever protection they have by holding office. They will be vulnerable to prosecution.
What about these claims that the new Prime Minister is merely there? It sounds simplistic, but that's what some people say, that he's there to protect and to give the Rajapaksas some kind of protection.
Well, I mean, the new Prime Minister has said that he's come in to rectify the terrible economic circumstances that we have got ourselves into. Now,
he didn't help the whole issue with what he oversaw at the central bank. He was the Minister of Finance. He was Prime Minister. And
whatever it is, he has now taken over to take control of the economy, to deal with the economy, to get us the bridging finance and all of that. However, as we said at the Centre for Policy Alternatives in our statement on his assumption to the office of Prime Minister, is that you have to also look at not just the economic dimensions, but also the political dimensions. You have to talk about what you're going to do with regard to abolishing the executive presidency, getting Gotabaya Rajapaksa to leave the presidency, talking about a new general election, all of those kinds of things. You can't just separate the economy and pursue it, because what we have is a crisis of governance. And therefore, when we are going to go to the IMF and when we are going through these dire economic circumstances, we have a lot more bitter medicine to swallow. And you need a government who will carry the people along with them.
And the IMF, it's a two-part question. Why are they taking their time about it? And two, would it be better if the Prime Minister could demonstrate in Parliament that he actually does have the majority in Parliament?
Well, two-part question. So why is the IMF taking time? Well, as you know, we still don't have a finance minister.
By default, that will come under the president.
No, but we have to have a finance minister. It's only until day before yesterday that we got a government. Yeah. So that answers your question in part. But furthermore, the IMF also has its rules, its procedures. It wants to make sure that we have a government that's politically stable, that can fulfill the agreements that it makes, all of that. And so it goes through various levels, and that takes time. With regard to the second part of your question, which was, why doesn't the Prime Minister go to Parliament?
Indeed. Shall we take that answer after the break?
Sure.
Because Harshne wants to go for a break. And we'll see you on the other side of the break after the headlines from the Newsfirst Primetime News Day. Thank you.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
Prime Minister addresses the nation. What is the new plan?
22 වසර සඳහා ඉදිරිපත් කළ සංවර්ධන අයවැය වෙනුවට අලුත් අයවැයක් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නට සැලසුම් කරලා තිබෙනවා. මේ වන විට දැඩි ලෙස අලාභ ලැබෙමින් සිටින ශ්‍රී ලංකා ගුවන් සේවය පුද්ගලිකකරණය කිරීමට මම යෝජනා කරනවා.
Message of the SJB and the SLFP to the Prime Minister. Are the 10 independent parties of two different views?
ඇමති ධූර බාරගන්නේ නැතුව රට ගොඩනැගීමේ ප්‍රයත්නයේට අපේ සහාය ලබා දෙන බව අගමැතිතුමාට දැනුම් දුන්නා. ඉතින් තවමත් පක්ෂදායී විදිහට අවසාන තීරණයක් අරගෙන නැහැ.
Energy Minister speaks about the fuel shortage. who destroyed the properties of MPs and ministers.
මම කිසිසේත් හිතුවේ නෑ අපේ ගෙදරට ගිනි තියයි කියලා. මොකද මම හැම කෙනෙකුටම පක්ෂ ભેදයෙන් තොර ඉතාම සාධාරණ විදියට මට පුළුවන් හැම කාර්යයක්ම කරලා.
Matthews misses a double century by a run.
And he's out. Would you believe it? The field was brought up.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukutali.
Welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Saravanamuttu, the Executive Director at the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Part 2 then. Should the Prime Minister go to Parliament, confirm his majority, demonstrate that majority, and then go to the IMF?
Well, I mean, if he's in doubts about his majority, then perhaps he should do that. But I think it's much more commonplace. It's much more commonplace. Well, and ask your MP to do it. Ask your MP to get his part.
There.
That is why
there's a good number of people who
the opposition should then bring a vote of no confidence and get Parliament to
pass collective opposition?
Collective opposition or the SJB or anyone should bring the vote of no confidence and see. But what we have on record is the SJB, the Gaman Pilla's party, the SLFP, all saying that they will support this government on the economic front.
Yes, on national matters.
Yeah, so I don't think he would feel that there is a need to go for a vote of confidence.
So on the basis of those statements, the IMF may well be minded to consider that Sri Lanka has a government of some stability.
Yes, the IMF may well come to that conclusion, yes.
Thank you very much for your questions by SMS or on WhatsApp to 0772 300 305. Gota was the President Gota was the Defence Secretary who won the war and brought peace to Sri Lanka. He had a successful vaccination program, the building of all forces hospitals, and so many things he has done are engraved in the people's mind. My question to you, is there anyone in Parliament now who can surpass him? That's a question from a viewer.
Well, I mean, to begin with, all of these things that he's supposed to have done, there are people who question as to whether he's solely responsible for it. Yeah, that's one.
Now, Field Marshal Fonseca, for example.
Yeah. Secondly, you know, this person should ask themselves the question of why we have a Gota Gogama. Why are people still demanding that he go home? Because in the position of President of this country, he has not demonstrated the capacity to govern. This was supposed to be the strong, decisive leader who, in the worst crisis that has affected this country, has taken almost 2 months to talk to the country.
Is that because he sort of pandered to his brother, the war-winning president?
No, but the point is this.
And to various people, including media moguls and other henchmen.
The office of the
Is that why, do you think?
The office of the President of Sri Lanka, or indeed any country, first and foremost, is to lead, not to pander.
Or to follow.
Or to follow. Exactly.
So that's true. So either you lead.
And you lead by consensus.
And you can't be following. And if you can't do that as well, you might as well go, stand aside.
Absolutely.
Mr. Rajamandan had that on his desk.
Fine.
Lead, follow, or get out of the way. But he would have seen that when he met Boss all those years ago.
Well,
and then Gota go home. Those people are saying the same thing.
Yes, but I think you have to understand that Gotabaya Rajapaksa is president, not just for himself. He's president for a family, for a dynasty.
What, the family of Sri Lanka or the family of the Rajapaksa family?
The Rajapaksa family. If he gets out of power, as I said to you before, he will be terribly vulnerable. And
but he was so vulnerable in those 4 years.
The rest of the family as
under the Palani government, they did almost nothing.
Well, things have changed now.
Well, we thought that then, and nothing really did happen.
Well, Let's see.
Sajin Vasigunawardena was kept in remand for about 6 months, and then, he was slapped with a fine for 1,000
Lots of
rupees.
things that were supposed to have happened under Yahapalana did not happen. But that does not mean that that is what will always happen. It can change.
Do you think that we are living through a remarkable period at the moment in which we will see the end, the real end of the Rajapaksa dynasty?
Well, it's entirely possible, but then there are, the next day is the next generation. There's Nama Rajapaksa, who can contest
Don't you think that,
like Bong Bong Marcos,
yeah,
contest an election many, many years later and win it. Yeah.
provided he can handle all the allegations against him?
Yes, yes.
Do you think that in all of this, that our judicial system, that our judiciary will be strong and will be strengthened?
I certainly do hope so. And I think there are signs that, yes, that the system of justice, the system of law and order, that they are responding to the need of the hour. Let's hope that that is something that is going to be sustained and persistent in the pursuit of justice and accountability.
This might be obvious, but let's ask the question. Is it the economy or the constitution that's the need of the hour now, Dr. Saravanamuttu?
What we have is a crisis of governance, and that crisis of governance deals with political questions as well as economic ones. So one cannot separate them out as such, because you need a strong government to take the necessary measures on the economy, and you need a government that has legitimacy and credibility as far as the people of this country are concerned.
And what can the people, not only the people who are protesting, but the wider public too, what can they do? Can they sort of petition the Supreme Court and say, look, we're terribly unhappy with this chap who's now the president because we voted for him?
What they can do is to join the protesters, and when it comes to a general election, or if indeed the presidency is still with us, comes to a presidential election, vote accordingly. But hopefully we would have abolished the presidency and we would have have a general election.
As a sort of observer, almost a sort of watchdog, if you like, of events that's happening here, don't you think that the Inspector General of Police has failed in his duties, moral and legal and constitutional, I suppose, in that, these people were let out of the sort of left tempo trees through the front, and they were armed with various instruments that we can now call weapons, and sort of beat up these peaceful protesters. And the police didn't deem it fit to use water cannons, tear gas, or shoot in the air at that time. They did, but when it was after they'd done much of the damage.
Well, I just got a news alert before we started this show saying that the AG had instructed the IGP to go out and arrest various Rajapaksa supporters who were responsible for the crimes and atrocities.
That's exactly my point. Why does it have to be the AG? Why can't the IGP just do his job? We pay him. He lives an air-conditioned life thanks to us, the people.
Well, therefore, the police commission should come in and deal with him.
But it's ridiculous. This goes on forever and a day. There are members of parliament
That is why we badly need the governance reforms of the institutions and of the processes. We have
what chances are there for all of that, Dr. Saravanamuttu, now that Ranil Wickremesinghe is Prime Minister?
Well, Ranil Wickremesinghe is concentrating, he's focusing on the economic side. He's talking about bringing in the 21st Amendment.
Will he use that, important as it is, will he use that focus to say, well, look, I've got no time to sort these Rajapaksas out, let's just let them go?
Well, if he doesn't take into account the whole question of the political reforms, then I think there will be serious problems. Because the protesters are not going away. Their demand has been consistent. So, you have to deal with both. Granted, he has said that, look, my priority is to get the bridging finance and to get the economy back on track. But in order to do that also, you need to have the right political leadership that the country will swing behind.
But Dr. Saravanamuttu, whilst we hear what you say, What about all these people who've had their businesses, homes, property, other assets burnt, thrashed? What about that then?
So those who did that will have to be held accountable. They will have to be paid compensation, perhaps.
Who will pay compensation?
The state will pay compensation.
So we have to print even more money?
Well, if it is going to be a question that we won't
because
be able
much of these businesses and people would have not taken SRCC cover, the Strikes, Riots, Civil Commotion cover on their insurance.
Well,
because after the end of the war, they wouldn't have thought there was a need.
Well, if anyone is going to have to pay compensation, it has to come from the state, because the state was unable to protect them from the attacks, etc.
Do you think, this is a question, thank you very much for your questions, ladies and gentlemen. Ranil wants to be president, his dream. That's not a question, it's a statement, but let's turn it into a question. Will that happen? Will he become the president?
Well, if Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigns tomorrow, the Prime Minister becomes the president.
For what, 30 days?
For 30 days, in which Parliament has to then appoint one of their own to serve out the unexpired term.
Right. What chances are there, how long before we see these queues disappear? Today, you know, I saw a queue from the baseline road all the way down to Maligawat and, you know, winding its way into side streets. People were pushing their three-wheelers. They've been standing there for hours. It's a double-edged sword. They're standing for so long that they can't go out there and earn the money, you know, because they need that. So it's, you know, frustrating. And 62% of our working population are daily waged. What chances are there? How long do you think, in your estimate?
Well, the Prime Minister, when he spoke to the country today on the economic situation, he pledged that he would end all of these queues and that people would be able to have 3 square meals a day and all of that. So, I mean, he's not sort of saying, I'll do this in 2 weeks or I'll do this in 2 months or whatever, but he's saying that he is prioritizing this, and therefore we have to wait and see.
And you say that one of the things to get our economy going again, a centerpiece would be an announcement, at least the minimum would be an announcement of a time frame in which President Gotabaya Rajapaksa
Absolutely. Time frame with regard to that, abolition of the executive presidency and going to a general election.
Sad. Sad that we find ourselves like this.
No, absolutely.
74 years after.
But that is why we have to use this as an opportunity to turn it around and proceed with the necessary reforms this country
Have you hired
has
more
been
staff
crying
at
out
the CPA?
Sorry?
Have you hired more staff? Because it looks like you've got your work cut out. And then you're going to have be watchful of everything else. And we say this, that it was marvellous that Ranil Wickremesinghe had the gumption to come up here and the strength to take it on. I say that, of course. I'm not doing a U-turn, but I'm saying that within the background of the bond scam.
Well, I mean, whatever it is I suppose it is nice to hear you saying this about Ranil Wickremesinghe, given that...
At Newsfirst we're balanced.
There was a time where you were prone to being accused of not being balanced with
I'm sorry, but when
you brought up the bond scam.
Possible
occasion.
Yes, I brought it up at every single occasion, and I think it was well deserved. But thank you that you came on the program, and we look forward to hearing more of your work in the forthcoming days and weeks. And on that note, it's time for the Primetime News. Take care. Have a wonderful week ahead of you, and as always, God bless you all.